In the mid-1800s, much of the area west of the Mississippi River was a largely undiscovered land. Trappers, miners, and pioneers all came west with the hope of creating a new life. People of the Mormon faith came west with similar intent and established many of the new communities in the Utah Territory. One such community was Fairview, initially established in 1863, approximately 20 miles west of what is now Bryce Canyon National Park. The valley where the pioneers settled sits at an elevation of 6,600 feet, and this made for a short growing season and a difficult place to produce good crops. As deep snow came too early in the second winter, the pioneers were faced with wheat that had not matured and was still green, and therefore difficult to grind into a usable flour. The people resorted to boiling the wheat, but it was barely palatable. The men of the community hunted and fished, but this was difficult as they were competing with the Indians for available meat. Without a solution, the pioneers were facing starvation. Leaders discussed their grave situation and decided that they would send out two groups to obtain flour. One party headed north for Gunnison, 110 miles away, but on a series of valley trails where they hoped to find less snow. The other group began a 45-mile trek west over a high mountain pass toward the community of Parowan. The northbound party returned almost immediately due to heavy snows blocking the passage leading to Gunnison. The burden of acquiring food now lay heavily on the shoulders of the 7 men bound for Parowan. Traveling by wagon, they were able to make fairly good progress on the first stage of their journey. But each stream they crossed slowed them down, and the snow gradually deepened as the men ascended the difficult trail. Reaching a mountain pass, their wagon team foundered in the deep snow, and it became apparent that they would have to finish the mountain crossing on foot. Feelings of exhaustion came quickly as the men overexerted themselves while their legs sunk deep in the snow, fighting what seemed to be a losing battle. Under these conditions, it was apparent that the journey would be impossible, and it was at this point that they were about to give up. In this hopeless situation, these men of faith laid out bedding on the snow and knelt to pray.
Dear Heavenly Father,
in the course of their petitioning God for help, the realization came that the quilt on which they knelt was providing a broader surface on the snow and thereby supporting their weight. This inspired an effort to continue their trek, walking on their blanket by painstakingly laying one blanket after another to create a quilted pathway across the mountain. Feelings of gratitude likely coursed through the minds of these men for the women who so well crafted these quilts, not only for warmth, but as a means to conquer the challenges of the deep snow. The weary party finally reached Parowan, where they were anxiously received by fellow settlers. With little time for recuperation, they acquired as many sacks of flour as they could carry. On the more arduous return trip, several people from Parowan assisted the group as far up the mountain as was possible. In In the deepest snows, where walking on quilts was again required, the men of Fairview shouldered their own burdens and continued on alone. Meanwhile, the wives and children who remained in Fairview anxiously anticipated the long overdue return of their husbands and fathers.
We're going to say a prayer for your father.
Many in the community feared the worst in an already grave situation. Little is recorded of the return journey, where the men not only carried the sacks of flour over the mountains, but also faced the task of spreading and recovering their quilts. It is likely no one wanted to remember this exhausting portion of the trek. A journey that is estimated to have taken 10 to 14 days finally brought the men back to their wagon and team. They loaded their supplies and traveled the last leg of their expedition toward Fairview. As the men came into view, the people of Fairview gathered to celebrate their safe return. These destitute pioneers were comforted in the knowledge that they now had enough flour to survive till spring. The unconquerable spirit of the pioneers who settled Fairview lives on in the hearts of the people who live in this region today. Oculus Media.